Hello and welcome to this episode 10 of This Spiritual Fix, where today we're going to be talking about soulmate compatibility. Whether that's through your primary wound or your language of love or just your deal makers and deal breakers. Stay tuned.
Hypnosis, mindfulness, meditation, past life regression, RTT, spirituality.
This Spiritual Fix. Two mystical mamas hacking the self-help game.
With Anna Stromquist and Kristina Wiltsey.
Hello, Kristina.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Are you?
I am.
Your dog's got in a fight.
My dogs got in a fight. I was stupid.
Accept yourself. Accept that it happened. You don't have to judge yourself in any way. Okay? It happened.
And seeing the blood freaked me out, I'll be honest, because I'm like, where's the blood coming from? Who got bit?
Yeah.
Who needs to go to the vet or not go to the vet? And luckily, it was a surface. It was just a little cut on the nose of one of them. He's fine.
I think it's important that people understand that, like, you should be accepting of your stuff, you know, like you don't have to say that you were stupid. You don't have to say anything like that.
Yeah.
There's no reason to know that that situation was going to end up in something. I mean, you could say the same thing about my situation with I lost my sister's cat, my niece's cat, more worse. And because she got out at the beginning of the day, we were supposed to be keeping her inside, and she's like a super outdoor cat. We were keeping her inside for a week and a half, and she had just been kind of unhappy and like not getting along with my cat. And we saw her outside, but I was in a rush, so I didn't help get her back inside. And so I left, and then my husband tried to get her back inside, and he dove for her and he dislocated his pinky, and he had to go to the hospital. And then I was gone, and then he was at the hospital, and then the cat ran away. And literally it's been 2.5 days and she hasn't come back. And so it's like, I can be like, for days, I was just like, I'm such a terrible person. Like, this could be, I went into the self-judgment state to make myself feel better and to like pay the guilt God demon thing. Right.
Yeah. Pay the guilt God.
and then when I talked to my sister, she's just like, Kristina, you know that if that's what's meant to be, like if she's meant to have another home, like she could come back. And if she doesn't, then she's just meant to have another home and she's meant to transition.
God, your sister's enlightened.
Yeah, right.
Seriously.
But that's the thing, right? Is that like, I feel like we often tend to punish ourselves when we think that other people think that we should be punished. It's an instinct that we have to say, well, you don't have to punish me because I've already punished myself by telling how stupid I am.
Well,
and doing all this kind of stuff.
I think also by saying I'm so dumb is because I did something. I let the dogs get together during mealtime, which is a big no-no. And I know that, but one dog wasn't eating. So I thought he didn't care. And then he apparently did care because they started fighting, and I felt stupid. You know, it wasn't stupid. It was, I hated myself in that moment because I adore my dog. And then to see him in pain and bleeding and to think I'm responsible for that, it broke my heart. But then also, you know what? It wasn't my fault. It was the dog's fault in a way. Like they were
just acting on their nature, right? Yeah. Everybody was just acting in the way that they knew how.
Right.
Right.
And I thought, he's not hungry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the point is that, you know,
what's the take home deeper message about losing a cat and having your dog get beat up by the other dog?
Is that nature happens and things happen. And if you try and punish yourself for things that you've done wrong to preempt somebody else punishing you, it's not loving and accepting in the way that we try to aspire to be. And it's also, there's a recognition that sometimes, especially when you're mixing with Mother Nature and elementals and like animals and things like that, like sometimes there's just a natural thing that happens. Yes, you can prevent it as much as possible, but it's really hard to control. Right. So I know that it makes you uncomfortable for me to bring it up.
Well, no, it's okay because I love that dog.
I even loved this new cat, even though I only had her for a week and a half. How are you otherwise?
Otherwise, I'm good. I'm feeling really good.
Cool.
Yeah.
I am too. I am too. I was just going to give a little update on my PMDD or PME kind of body betrayal stuff. Just real quick.
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't listened to the previous episodes, PMDD is premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, which is, let's say, dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria.
Yeah.
So PMDD is a severe form of PMS where they call it in the subreddit groups Werewolf Week. It is just, it's like PMS squared.
Yeah.
It's just really, really hard, especially when you're a happy, sane person 3 weeks out of the month. And then you have a week of like total despair. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about PMDD.
And PME is
Post or premenstrual exacerbation. So
Yeah.
that means, so PME, premenstrual exacerbation, means if you have any underlying mental illness, say depression, bipolar, OCD, if you have any of those, then during PMS, they get exacerbated by the hormone drops. And so you might have, say, undiagnosed anxiety all month, but you don't really know about it. And then come PMS week, anxiety is full blown because that hormonal dip has pulled everything else up to the surface.
Yep, exactly. So I think I have more of a PME, but I don't have anything diagnosed underneath. I would just think that like regularized low level anxiety and depression is just kind of what I've had. But really interesting. I think you've actually had this experience as well, is that I think I said on the last one that like I figured out that I was that I like stopped eating gluten and it made my anxiety go way down. I did a genetic test and found out that I had actually inherited non-celiac genetic sensitivity from both my parents. So it was double because of that. And then I stopped eating, and then I found out that I was allergic to soy, dairy, and eggs. The exacerbation is significantly less. And didn't you find something interesting with the same thing with allergens for yourself?
Yeah. So I found out that PMDD can be an allergic response to your own hormones. So instead of antidepressants, some women just take antihistamines during their PMS week to have a reduction, like complete reduction in symptoms. And I realized that my PMDD got so worse in the year 2020. Well, I thought maybe it was the stress of the pandemic that exacerbated my PMDD. But then I finally, after reading the histamine thing, I realized, no, I started getting allergy shots in 2020 because I have like really bad seasonal allergies. And for those who don't know, allergy shots just means you go to the doctor and they inject you with the actual allergen. And you have a histamine response, very low level, until you cap out on your highest level. So I capped out because I had a full-blown hives reaction. So they're like, okay, now we have to backtrack. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I finally made sense of it, that my PMDD was always worse if it was on a Friday in the year 2020. And I always go to the allergist on Thursdays. And it was just like this light bulb went off. And I was like, oh my God, I was having a histamine response. So then what happened is I went to the allergist on Thursday, got my shots, and the very next morning I woke up depressed. Now, it was not PMDD week, so there was no reason like hormonally to be depressed, but I woke up in a funk being like, oh my God, I just hate my life right now. Like there was no good reason to say that. I'm like what the hell? I thought I'm going to play an experiment. I'm going to take a Benadryl and just see what happens. I took a Benadryl. 40 minutes later, I was perfectly fine. And so it was showing me that, yes, this is like when there are allergens in my body, like when I'm overrun with allergens, it makes me like sad or angry. And in this case, it made me depressed. So it was just a huge revelation that histamines or allergens inside the body can really affect your mental status. And now I'm thinking I need to do the test you did. And can you please link it in the soap notes or the show notes? I want to know like what I'm allergic to that I'm eating, because if allergens can make you depressed, like what?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, like, I can't tell you, I've gone on like this massive regimen of supplements and stuff like that too, because I've had an allergen response for so long that I'm like systemically malnourished, which is like crazy to hear. And actually it made me feel so much more validated about my hypochondria to like recognize all of the things that could result from being like having just some random ass stuff, like just like anemia, but also like anemia in a really random way to be anemic. Like you don't have the iron because like you have everything else in the cycle, but it just stops before the anemic cycle. And like, whatever, I'm not going to get into my medical history, but like I can say that I feel so much better after cutting out all that stuff in my diet. Like, it's not even a question now. Like my mental health is so much more important than whatever craving I could possibly have. I don't even have the cravings.
Right. I have a friend, she's in incredible shape. And I asked her, like, how does she think about food? Because I think how you think about food is more important than what you eat. And she said, whenever I see something, I always say to myself, nothing tastes as good as fit feels. I love that quote,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with mental health. Like, nothing tastes as good as sanity. So with that point, I'm definitely taking that allergy test. I want to know what I'm eating that I shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because it's a real thing. And I think it's worth it. I'm not saying that everyone should go take allergen tests, but if you feel like you have low level anxiety and depression and it feels like it's kind of erratic and all over the place and you don't really know what's going on, and some days it's worse and some days it's better.
It could be histamine.
It could be a histamine response. And I think it's worth it because it has changed my life. And like I said, I don't even consider any of that stuff anymore. I mean, I think self-love is a huge part of eating well as well. Cause like the more I've loved myself, the more I've just like come to accept and love myself, the more I'm just like, why would I eat anything that's bad for me?
Nothing tastes as good as self-love.
Yeah. Nothing tastes as good as self-love. So that's my PME, update. And I just want to let everybody know because I will continue to, let you guys know how much better I am feeling and how much I don't feel so close to that line of like being sick. Like normally during my cycle before ovulation, I used to feel like I had the flu for like a day. Nothing at all. Like didn't even consider it this time.
Wow.
So,
fascinating. Yeah. And it makes sense. It makes sense.
It does. It does. Cool. So what are we talking about today, Anna?
So today we're going to talk about attracting your soulmate partner. So me and my friend called it our triple SMH, super sweet soulmate husband. We were on a quest to find our super sweet soulmate husband. We called it triple SMH. So when we texted each other, we'd have a 3 SMH, like discussing this potential future soulmate husband, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I know I'm cisgender and hetero, so it's a really biased thing here that I'm talking about it in this sense. So I want to know if I accidentally use the term husband, just replace it with partner in your mind. I'm not perfect at this, so forgive me. But if I do say the word husband, I mean the more masculine person in the relationship. And if I'm saying wife, I mean more feminine. So I just want to give that disclaimer because I want this to be available to anybody. Like this is not just for cisgender hetero women.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to talk about is when I had a wonderful relationship with a boyfriend and we broke up. And in retrospect, I realized we broke up because of my PMDD. I went psycho on him and he couldn't handle it, which is fine. I don't think I could have handled it at that age and where I was in life. So it's fine. But after that happened, I threw myself into a mission of attracting my triple SMH. And me and 2 other best friends were also on a mission to find our triple SMHs. So what did we do? We all read like the same books. We'd read like some books. We'd share which one was the best one. And then we'd all read it. And believe it or not, within 2 years of reading these books, we all got married to our triple SMHs. So I'm going to discuss those books and what we learned from them. I'm just going to abbreviate them all. And I think this is great for people who are seeking a partner. And if you already have a partner, I think it's still good to hear this stuff because you can kind of reflect like where in your relationship are there areas that are incompatible and how can you fix them? So
yeah. And this follows on from our interview that we did before with
Sophia. Right. Where she talks about manifesting your dream man. I'm not going to talk so much about the manifesting aspect but more of the cognitive, intellectual, logical stuff.
Sweet.
Stuff
so it's a good partnership.
So it's a good partnership. So these are the different things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the 5 languages of love, the 5 primal wounds, and also the deal makers and deal breakers you should be looking for. So the 5 languages of love, let's start with that. That's a book by Gary Chapman. And he talks about that we have like an emotional love tank. And if it's not full, then you feel like you're unloved. And those 5 languages are touch, verbal, meaning like praise, gifts, acts of service, and quality time. So it's important to recognize what is your primary love language. Like we need all of them. there's one that's going to be your primary one, and we're going to have a quiz in the show notes so you can find out what is your primary one or what is your partner's. But it's important. This is why I think it's so important. If you're dating, you need to know what is your primary language of love and what is their primary language of love. Because let's say your partner's primary language of love is touch, but you're from a culture or a family where like, you just don't touch people. And you need to recognize, look, if his language of love is touch and yours isn't, and you're not capable of changing for him, then you need to find someone else because it's not fair to him. Let's say, for example, your language of love is acts of service. So you need someone to do things for you, but the person that you're interested in is an heir and they've never worked a day in their life and they just sit off their income and spend their whole life on yachts and whatever. Be realistic. Yeah, they might give you all the riches in the world, but if your language of love is acts of service and they're not doing things for you, you're not going to feel loved.
Yeah.
So you need to just like recognize, is your partner capable of providing you with the language of love? If not, are they willing to change? And are you also willing to change?
Right. And so it's similar to if someone's language of love is they want to give quality time and the other person wants to receive being alone. It's literally like completely diametrically opposed. Yeah.
And like my husband's primary language of love is verbal. And I am the worst of all 5 of these. I am the worst at giving verbal. But I'm cognizant that he needs verbal as well as my sister. She's also verbal. So like every time I talk to my sister, I have this like buzzer that goes off on my brain before I hang up. And I'm like, did you compliment her in this conversation? Did you tell her what you love about her in this conversation? And I try to always end the conversation saying something loving to her because I know that that matters to her because she's verbal. Even though I feel weird saying it because I'm not verbal and it feels like I'm fake. Like I'm like, I just want to let you know I think you're a great mom. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm sounding like a freaking imposter. She likes it because that's her language. So like I'm getting over my imposter thing and I just do it.
Does she know that before now? Does she know that?
No, now that she listens to this, she's going to realize like Anna is cognizantly trying to make sure that I feel loved, which is fine. I'm trying to make her feel loved. So, and because I'm not great at verbal, like for my husband, one birthday, I made like 52 cards, like 1 per week. And it was like a compliment. And he could just open the card throughout the year and have a verbal compliment from me. So that was good. But anyways, the point is know your language of love, know their language of love. Make sure you can both give each other's language of love or you're going to have an empty tank. Yeah. Anything to add there?
No, I think that's great. It's funny. I can't actually tell you what my language of love is. I think with my kids, it's physical. Like I want to give physical, but with Luke, it's different. It's like, it's funny because I've never been able to like pinpoint mine. I'm one of those people who like, I feel a bit like a chameleon and like sometimes I like some things and sometimes I like other. Right. Can you be that person?
You can kind of, I think this is what I think. I think you can kind of be all of them. And when you're with a person who doesn't give one, it stands out. Like I had a boyfriend who was not gifts. He was like everything but gifts. And like come my birthday, come Valentine's Day, he gave me nothing. It drove me crazy that I started to think my language of love was gifts, but it actually isn't. My language of love is acts of service. But because I was so deficit in the language of gifts, I started to think that was it. So
that makes perfect sense. Yes. You know,
so anyways,
that's what Luke did. My husband did was when we were talking about it, he was like, I think your language of love is verbal. And I was like, you just think that because you don't give me verbal.
So that's what you end up complaining about.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to think that I like to receive gifts, but that was because that was the only kind of love for a very long time that I did receive, even though I had other needs for it. So since
you're an activity information sorter, which we address in a previous episode, in the NLP episode, I would guess, just knowing that you're activity information sorter, that your language of love is acts of service and verbal.
Yeah.
I would just guess that.
Yeah.
An important thing to know is that your child has not solidified languages of love yet. So just make sure you give all 5 to your kids.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, going forward, we're going to go into the 5 major wounds, and we're also going to have a quiz in the show notes. What is your primary wound? And those are betrayal, injustice, rejection, abandonment, humiliation. This is coming from a book called Know Yourself and Heal Your Wounds by Lise Bourbeau. It is not a relationship book, but my own internal understanding, having been married now, is it's important that you know what your primary wound is with the primary wound of your husband, and are they compatible? Now that sounds funny. Compatible wounds? Like what the hell is she talking about? But here's what I mean.
Dark and light. Love
here's what
and
I'm
darkness.
saying. If you both have an injustice wound, that can lead to some incompatibility, because when you think you're right and he's wrong, and he thinks he's right and you're wrong, you're going to really butt heads. So 2 primary wounds of injustice are pretty hard.
So it's similar to that communication episode that we did before, in which, what is it called? The fallacy, the perpetrator fallacy, or the
where
victim
you're always
fallacy?
The victim and you're always the victim.
And
Where one is always the victim and one always says, I'm always at fault. And then the
other one says, you're always at fault.
Right. Well, in this situation, if you both have an injustice wound, you're both going to be saying you're both at fault. The other one's at fault. So I think 2 people with an injustice wound is a bad combination. That's my own insight. This is not from a book. I think 2 people with a betrayal wound, though, would go along great because they both are going to be really loyal to each other.
Yeah, but they're also going to try and control each other. And if the other one doesn't do what the other one wants, then that's like...
Yeah, they both really value freedom.
Being a betrayal wound person myself, actually, well, I like to say that I drink from all the cocktails of the wounds. But being that person myself, like I would say that like it's nice to have a partner. It's nice to have a partner who you can control.
You have nice of a partner.
Did I actually just say that? No, sorry, Luke.
So if you can control your partner, quote unquote, control him, what is his primary wound? Rejection.
His primary wound is rejection. Right. Or who's the fugitive? Rejection. So his primary wound is rejection and mine is betrayal. So then he just like, if I try to control him, then he just becomes fugitive and then we don't actually have to have fights.
My husband and I are a great combination because mine is abandonment wound, which makes me codependent. His betrayal wound, which makes him controlling. So a controller with the codependent is great. I will say this. I think 2 injustice wounds would be a hard combination. I also think that if you run abandonment and your partner runs rejection, that's not a great combination because abandonment people are afraid of the other person shutting them out. And rejection people, when they cope with difficulty, they shut the other one out. So you're going to be getting shut out all the time. It'll be really hard. But then you have to also understand that every relationship brings with it challenges for you to look at your own shit and grow. So in some ways, if you have an abandonment wound and you get with someone with a rejection wound, they're going to pull your abandonment wound to the surface a lot. And if you're willing to do the work, it's great. If you kind of want an easy life and you don't want to be dealing with the shit storm of an abandonment wound every week, don't go with that guy.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, like, you'll have an experience like with my husband and me, like it's a matter of like, we don't have a lot of arguments. Like we don't actually fight, but what we do is we just like chase after each other, if that makes sense. Right. Like I'm always chasing after him to have the fight. And he's always like, I don't want to have the fight. Right. But it's like, that's like part of his personality anyway. But when you kind of come into those situations, like I don't know. You can definitely get into a better place as soon as you recognize and stop chasing after the fight and start recognizing that you don't actually have to have a fight in my case. And he can recognize that maybe he actually does have something to say and he wants to have the fight. And so as we've progressed in our relationship, we actually have discussions and like he stands up for himself and I back down and I stop chasing him and stop trying to chase the argument the same way.
Right. So in summary with this, just look at your 5 languages of love, see if you're compatible, see if you're willing to give what they need, see if they're willing to give what you need. And then also look at the 5 wounds, the 5 primal wounds, and just see like, are your wounds compatible with each other? And if not, what can you do to make them compatible? Because we're all flexible. We can learn. Just you have to know before you learn.
That's exactly what I think is a really important takeaway from this. If you spend your entire time like inventorying people for like, what is their primary interest? Like, are they an information sorter? Does this compatible? Like, if you like, it's really, really good to see it, but I think it's good to see it so that you can expand yourself. Because if you're going to go around and like a lot of people already have laundry lists of things that they require in another person before they can be okay with it. But recognize that like you are the magnet of your experience. So the more that you open yourself up to all of the different things and the more that you open yourself up to all the different polarities that could match with you, the more that person is going to come and can be anything.
Right.
And you will still be compatible.
Yes. Well, there's another great book called Are You the One for Me by Barbara Deangelis. And I'm going to go over, she has some really great points that I think people making vision boards about their partners should really take into account. I can't remember what she calls them, but I'm going to call them the deal makers and the deal breakers. So I think it's really important. If you're a person who has really rigid expectations of someone and you like expect this and expect that and you want them to be this and be that, it's really important you have a deal a deal breaker list and just adhere to that and radically forgive everything else. Be like, these are the 5 things I cannot live with. And beyond that, I am going to forgive everything else. Because if you constantly think this person has to like the same politician that I like, this person has to not like football, this person has to do this person has to do that, their hair needs to be like this. Like if you have this huge laundry list of things, you are super demanding, and that's not fair. You need to make your list of deal breakers and then radically forgive everything else. And similarly, if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're a pushover and you let everyone do whatever they want and you're always apologizing and you're like always accommodating, you also need a deal breaker list, because you need to say, these are like the 5 things I absolutely cannot tolerate and I will not nudge. If this person oversteps these 5 things, I'm out. Because the problem with being a pushover, which is on the other spectrum of being the controller, is you're over forgiving, you're over accommodating. You need to have some
boundaries.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, I'm going to read you Barbara Deangelis's. She has 9 deal breakers. These are just the standard. And then my theory is these are like, you have the standard ones and then you need to come up with your own. Like I think I have
customize.
Yeah. Then you make your own custom ones, you know? So, number 1 is addictions. 2 is unresolved anger. Like everyone gets angry, but we're talking about like an angry person who's not dealing with their anger. 3 is victim consciousness. 4 is a control freak. 5 is sexual dysfunction. 6 is they've not grown up. 7 is they're emotionally unavailable. 8 is they've not recovered from past relationships. And 9, they are emotionally damaged from childhood. I want to put an asterisk on 9 because we are all damaged from childhood. Yeah. But let's say that the person is doing the work. The person is doing the work to examine their damage, how they've been damaged, and they're working on it. Like if they're committed to growth and looking at their shit, I don't think number 9 is that much of a deal breaker.
I actually think that's the case with almost all of these. Almost all of these is that if you are working on it, like someone who is an addict, and is in recovery, they're still
an addict in recovery is different than
someone
an
actively in addiction.
I should clarify.
Yeah. Though, of course, we all have levels of addiction.
Right.
Most
so
likely.
These are her standard deal breakers. And again, I'm going to put this in the show notes. Then I think it's important you come up with your own deal breakers. So I have my own deal breakers. I have 3 deal breakers. What about you, Chris? Do you have any deal breakers?
I haven't actually. I could probably come up with them, but now that you're prompting this, then maybe I will do that. Go ahead with yours. And
my 3 are very silly, but not silly. They're important to me. My deal breakers is number 1, a fanatic of any sort, like a religious fanatic, just a fanatic in general. Mostly religious or political fanatic is what I would say. Sucked in a cult.
Yep.
Number 2 is cheap. I have very, very low tolerance for people who are stingy or cheap, not just with money, but their time, their affection. And number 3, what was my third one? Oh, they shut me out when they're upset. Coming from the point of view as an abandonment person, I know from reading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus that men like to go in their quote unquote cave. If they're emotionally upset, they need to retreat into their cave. And I get that. And I respect that. But there are some men and probably women that when they're upset, they just completely shut you out. It's probably the fugitive rejection wound thing. I can't deal with that. From the abandonment point of view, I feel abandoned. It's too hard for me. I need someone that even if they're mad at me, I will rather they scream and yell at me than they shut me out. I need them to participate in the relationship, even if they're mad at me, than shutting me out. I just can't deal with being shut out. Yeah. So those are my 3.
Yeah. Okay. So I've thought of my 3.
Okay.
Even though I was actually astutely listening to yours because you were prompting mine to come up with mine.
You were doing mind reading. Or not mind reading.
Rehearsing. So my first one is a skeptic, a true skeptic. Luke is a skeptic, but he loves me and he appreciates it. And he's I've seen enough at this point that I can believe it. But someone who's just never going to even bother listening to me about all of the crazy stuff that I can hear. I posted this thing on my Instagram the other day because I found it on TikTok, and it was about this woman who was humans used to not be able to see the color blue. So when I say that I'm dimension hopping and I'm doing all these, I can see your aura and I can go astral project and I can do all this kind of stuff. I'm not talking to mainstream people who can't see blue. I'm only talking to the people who can see blue. And even if my partner can't see the color blue, they have to be open to seeing the color blue.
Or believe that you do see the color blue. Or
believe that I see the color blue. So that would be one of mine.
I love that one.
Yeah. And then the other two are kind of the aspirations of the divine feminine, the divine masculine. I cannot stand it when people try and control my freedom, whether it's through money or through something else. When they're trying to control the output of what I can do, is like total deal breaker. I'm just like, and then that's what happened. I think we're definitely going to do a money episode here and how it relates to spirituality in a bit. But for me, I'm a free spirit and my husband is a control, like when it comes to money. And we had to come to a deal where I have a set amount of money, but especially because I'm technically the breadwinner in my family, but like where we have a set amount of money where no one can have any say over it.
Right. Like you each get an allowance.
Yeah. And that allowance is so important because I have to maintain my freedom in a monetary way. Like if he's going to budget, that's fine, but you don't touch this money because that kind of freedom, it was a massive point of contention.
If you want to spend $200 on lip gloss, I'm kidding. But like total freedom to do whatever.
Yeah. And then in the same other way is like someone who withholds love. They say, I will love you if.
Ugh.
So those are my three.
I love that. I mean, I love your deal breakers.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I don't remember what she calls these in the book, Barbara Deangelis, but I'm going to call them your deal makers. So these are the 5 standard things your partner needs to have. And then I made my own 5 deal makers, which I put on a vision board. And I ended up getting the husband that I wanted. And he had all of them. Anyways, her basic deal makers. Oh, there's actually 6. Are 1, committed to personal self-growth. 2, emotional openness. 3, integrity. 4, mature and responsible. 5, high self-esteem. Let's say healthy self-esteem, because high self-esteem could be,
Yeah.
And 6, positive attitude towards life. Mm-hmm. Those are all good. Again, they're going to be in the show notes. I made my own, which I put on a board in addition to these. And the first one was, and I think it was a brilliant thing to put on my vision board. Number 1 was spiritual and happy. And the reason why I put spiritual and happy was I was unconcerned if whoever I married was Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, non-denominational, atheist, whatever. If they were happy, I knew that whatever technique they were using was working. Mm-hmm. So I put number 1, spiritual and happy, because to me that just it kept everything wide open, but it made sure I attracted someone who was using a technique that worked for them.
Yep. That's awesome.
So that was a really, really smart one on my part.
Yep.
The other 5 on my vision board, I don't know. Should I share them? I don't think it matters too much. Or would it help people?
I mean, give a couple.
One was, handsome and attractive to me. Like I put handsome and attractive to me. Like it didn't matter to me if they were handsome and attractive by societal standards, which my husband is, but it was more important that I designate like they need to be handsome and attractive to me.
Yep.
I didn't care what other people thought.
Yep.
The other one was successful and generous. Mm-hmm. Because I'm like super materialistic and he needs to be successful and da-da-da. It was more like a man who is successful is a happy man who has committed to success and growth and hard work. So it was like the values behind success was what I was looking for, so much as like, he's this, he's that. I'm trying to think what else was on there. Oh, I think the last one was like loves me completely, like loves me completely and unconditionally. And my husband definitely does. Like he does. So my husband loves me so much. I just love this story and I want to share it. Like how number 5 manifests in reality. Like I am the chef in the family. I make 99% of all the food in the house with the exception of like toast. I make it all. And I take great pride in my cooking. And the one thing I do not know how to make is coffee. So every night my husband preps the coffee maker. And one morning he forgot to do it, but I really wanted my coffee. And I like woke him up and I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I'm really sorry to disturb your sleep, which is really important to him, but like, you didn't make the coffee last night and I really want coffee. He's like, babe, it's my greatest pleasure in life to make you happy. I will make that coffee. You can always wake me up for your coffee. And he like came downstairs and prepped the coffee. And it was just such a mundane, like little moment in the morning, but it was so special to me. Like that was my vision board coming to life. Like he loved me so much that he loves making me coffee at 5 a.m.
Because you're an acts of service gal.
Oh yeah, and I'm acts of service. So there you go. Those are my deal makers with my additional deal makers. And yeah, I think it's important to know what you want.
Yeah.
So what are some of your deal makers?
So it's interesting you say that because I am a passive in NLP. We talked about passive and active. I am a passive. I think we did, right? Did we actually cover that?
Yeah,
anyway,
we did.
I'll give a summary quickly.
We did, and it's in one of the previous episodes.
An active person is someone who goes and just like actively participates in the world. And a passive person is someone who just kind of waits for things to come to them. In relationships, I have 100% always been a passive person. Like things have just, this sounds maybe a little bit terrible, but like I've just kind of fallen into relationships even when I didn't necessarily want to. I'm almost like a pushover in the sense of like if someone's really wanting, like a great example is like I didn't want to date a guy who I ended up dating for 5 years. And then when I finally tried to break up with them, they were like, no. And it took me like weeks to recognize that I didn't matter if they didn't want to break up with me. Like, I know that sounds almost abusive and maybe it was, that was a while ago. It was my mother relationship, as I call it, as in like, it was,
he was like your mother.
He was like my mother. He was always sick and he was, yeah. So I've been very passive with relationships, but one of the things that I would say would be a deal maker for me is that when I first got together with Luke, we were exactly matched in the way that we needed to be. So whatever my wounds were at the time, he accommodated. So I'm still controlling, but I was very controlling back then. And he like just loved me no matter what, like no matter how crazy I was, or no matter, I mean, I even told him, he wrote a song about it. Actually, I told him about how I was just like, you don't want to deal with me. Like I just got out of this long relationship and I have so many issues. You don't want to. And he was just so persistent. And he was just like, no, he told me that he fell in love with me at first sound. So when I first talked to him, like he didn't see me, he heard me. And, of course, I don't think he remembers that now. I always remember that. But the whole idea being that like he was persistent. And at the time, I could control him and he was so devoted to me that he didn't really care. And as our relationship has progressed, it's become so much more equal in the way that like we're both spiritually, you know, progressing and the way that we are developed or whatever you want to say, like our spiritual things, as well as like the way we want to raise our kids. It's just like one of those things that the only deal maker that I would say is that they're willing to grow with you.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So in summary, we've talked about the 5 languages of love, the 5 primary wounds, your deal breakers. You have your standard list, which will be in the show notes. And then you need to make your own list. You got your deal breaker list. Again, the basics, and then you make your own. But here's the most important part, which I want to throw in. 2 things. 1, shit's going to happen anyways. Mm-hmm. And the beautiful thing about a relationship is it helps see where you are stuck. So when things happen in the relationship, always ask yourself, or this is my advice, like, how am I showing up? Am I being the person I want to be in a relationship? Because it's so easy when the shit hits the fan to think it's the other person's fault and look at all their faults and how do they need to change. I think it's so important to just keep asking yourself over and over again, who am I? How am I showing up? Am I being the person I want to be? Would I want to be with me? And that's super important because we get so caught up in like, what can this person give me? And then the second thing I want to say is you make your list. You adhere to your deal breakers and your deal makers, and then you radically forgive everything else. No one is perfect. The best example I have that I joke with my friends is if I had married Buddha, I would have been so annoyed. That man spends all day talking to everybody else and he ignores me. Mm-hmm. You know, if I was married, another perfect man, let's say is Jesus, I'd be like, oh my gosh, he spends all day baptizing other people. Doesn't he care about his wife? The point is, you could be married to the perfect man and you will find fault because the fault finding belongs to the fault finder. Okay?
Ooh,
the criticism belongs to the criticizer.
Yep.
And I think it's super important to just radically forgive. You have your standards, and then beyond that, let it go. Radically forgive. Remember, your partner is not perfect. Your partner has come on earth to learn lessons, and they are imperfect, and they're going to fuck up, and they're going to say things they don't mean when they're upset. And you just keep forgiving. Like, one of the best practices you can do is wake up every morning, just radically forgive everything they did to you, quote, to you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that you told me ages ago, which I think one of your friends told you, Secretario, was that how you can tell if you are coming from a place of wounds or if you're coming from a place of just like general.
She calls it coming from the whole, your WHOLE, like your wholeness, versus coming from your whole, meaning your HOLE, like something lacking in you.
Yeah. It's this idea that as soon as specificity comes into the equation, if you have a requirement of someone, or if you're telling someone something like, you didn't
wash my dish.
You didn't wash my dish, or you left your dish out on the table and it da-da-da-da-da-da. Like it's like as soon as you start getting incredibly specific about your requirements of what is required for you to be happy, for you to have acceptance, for you to be okay, then you know that you're coming from your whole as in your HOLE.
Right. So the way that Sagrario put it, which I love, is specific requests are coming from the whole, HOLE, and general requests are coming from the whole, WHOLE.
Yeah.
Like, I need him to bring me flowers on Valentine's Day. That's specific. That's a wound. A general request is, I need to feel loved on Valentine's Day. Or forget the Valentine's Day. That's specific.
Yeah,
I just need to feel loved.
Yeah.
And then you look at that, and are you getting it? Are you getting the general? You don't need the specific.
Yep, exactly. Because like it's funny because you were just saying that, and I was thinking of another deal breaker was for me promises broken, and I was like, that's so specific. I was like, that's totally coming. That for me, my deal breaker in that particular one, which I didn't mention earlier, but I was just thinking of it was like, because it's so specific, because it's happened to me. I was like, it happened to me when I was a kid, and therefore I know that I don't want that to happen to me now. And it just like, I'm just like, oh, okay, that's coming from the HOLE.
We should probably say that whatever you have on your deal breaker list is probably a reflection of some wounds that need to be healed, but also have your standards. I mean, you have to have standards.
Yeah, I would say that half of mine did, half of mine didn't. Because like the other half, like wanting to be loved unconditionally, like it's on both of our lists, right? Like mine's on the deal breaker, yours on the deal maker. That is an aspirational general thing. That's like a thing that says like, if you are seeing the world as limited and therefore you have a scarcity of love to give, then maybe we're not in the same place and we don't want to be in the same thing. So like, I feel like that's more of a general thing. You could have general and you could have specific deal breakers and makers.
So in conclusion, check out the show notes. We'll have lists here for anyone who is single looking for their perfect mate. This list should help. And then if you already are in a relationship, hopefully you can still make your deal maker list and practice radical forgiveness.
Yep. And if you're not looking for that person, then good on you. Just have the experience with yourself.
And by the way, in the end, it's all you anyways. That's the joke.
Well, that's the funny thing, right? Because I was just thinking, it's like, if you weren't interested in having a relationship like that, then you can start to look at your friends' relationships. You can start to look at all these other things, right, that you have. But you can also recognize that you have them in yourself. So like self-love. I have deal breakers and deal makers on when I'm going to choose to love myself. Like 100%. And I actually think that I need to get rid of those in that particular case, right? Because like, it can't be that like, okay, Kristina, you're okay, but as soon as you yell at your kids, you are totally out in the doghouse. Like, and I'll be out in the doghouse for days. I think you're the same way, right? So it's like, okay, let's forgive ourselves for all the things that we have and show self-love. And then we can start to recognize when there will be a place and a time in which everything makes the deal.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of This Spiritual Fix. We hope that you enjoyed yourself. If you like us, please rate and review on Apple or wherever you get your podcast, because that is what helps people find us. Thanks so much and have a great day.
And remember,
Humility, gratitude, acceptance, done.
Hi, Kristina, co-host of This Spiritual Fix. Has listening to our podcast stirred up something for you with the primal wounds? The good news is you have access, and that is the first step to transforming these wounds. We created support packages to help you through this process, and they're available on our website, www.thisspiritualfix.com. These packages were designed by Anna and I, combining techniques and hacks from our own experience working through our own wounds. Each packet contains a workbook and 2 meditations, one about forgiving those who have wounded you, including yourself, and one about reprogramming old beliefs. You can buy an individual support package, or for those next level processors, all 5 packets: abandonment, injustice, rejection, betrayal, and humiliation. Available on our website and our shop.